Today we'll finish the clamshell enclosure. We'll finish making the trays, then we'll make the case, and then we'll bring it all together. We left the trays with the walls covered, but the inside of the base uncovered. Now we don't want a ridge line around the inside of the base where the cloth turn-ins stop. So I'm going to infill with some manila card that's about the same thickness as the cloth. So I'll just spend a bit of time fitting that. The other option is to infill with the same cloth. There's pros and cons to both infilling with the card and cloth. The card is a bright colour and the cloth isn't completely opaque, so you can actually slightly see it through the cloth. But I actually quite like the bright background underneath the cloth, so I don't mind that. If you infill with the cloth, then you probably want to wrap it around the front edge, which means you'll end up with 2 layers of cloth underneath the tray. I'm not sure if that's bad or not. I just prefer to infill with the card, though if you've watched Sage Reynolds videos, he infills with cloth. So I'm going to stick with the card. So I've made the infill card wider than I need, and I'll glue it in and then trim it up later. I'm fitting the cloth, which will wrap around the front edge, and then I'll do all the gluing together. Once I've glued in these 2 pieces of card, then I'll trim them at the front edge of the trays, and then I'll glue out the cloth and then put that in and wrap it around the front edge. I don't think there's anything particularly tricky about this, just making sure that you don't get an overlap of material and getting a little ridge line, having spent a lot of time trying to avoid showing any of the structure underneath the cloth. Sage Reynolds infills the underneath of the trays. I just don't think it's necessary. Try putting it on the bench and pushing down in the middle of the tray. You're very unlikely to feel any give. So now's a good time to just make sure everything's fitting correctly and that you haven't made any measurement mistakes. And it's time to make the case. So we'll cut out 2 pieces of board for the outsides of the case. These 2 pieces of board are the same size. There's going to be a slight square around the trays. I'm using the usual 3mm, which is appropriate for this size of a book. The open edge of the tray will be flush with the board, and there'll be a 3mm, or whatever size you want, square on the other edge as well. The spine piece is the same width as the thickness of the boxes. So just go around and measure that, making sure that you don't include the thickness of the board that you're helping use to measure. Now I want to leave a little inset window to insert a label into later. So I'm going to laminate 2 pieces of board together for this. So I'll use a piece of 1mm grey board and a piece of card that's 0.7 thick, and the 2 of them will end up the same thickness as the board that I've been using. I think I may have mentioned that I was using 2mm board. I thought I was using 2mm board. I got it out of my 2mm thick pile. It turns out it's a weird size. It must have got mixed in at some point. It's 1.75mm. So what I'm making now will end up close enough. So I've just traced around the spine piece, now marking it up as though it had, the traditional panels, and then I'm going to cut out an inset for a panel at the top. So I've come in 5mm from the edges, and I think I used a pretend 15mm kettle stitch location at the top, and 4 equal panels for the spine, because it's not a huge book. Don't throw the little square or rectangle of card away. We'll just slightly trim that up, take 1mm off each edge, and we'll use that to press that shape through the cloth later. So we'll laminate the grey board to the cardstock, lining it up with the original markings, and then once the adhesive has set up a bit, which isn't very long, we can trim it up. So we've got all our pieces for the case. Now we need to work out how we're going to space that joint. Now if you've done the portfolio, I made a tool for that it was the thickness of the board and 5 layers of cloth. For this one I'm going to do 4 layers of cloth. So take a scrap piece of board and wrap 2 pieces of scrap cloth around it to give 4 layers of cloth, and we'll use that as the tool to set the width of those joints. Now it's time to cut our covering material. So I'll cut a piece of covering material that's a bit larger than I need, and then cut that out. And I'll also cut a piece of cloth that's going to go on the inside of the spine. Now that goes about 1 inch, maybe 1.25 inches past the edge of the joint. Doesn't have to be exact. We'll trim that up a bit later as well. but I just want to cut that out now while I've got the cloth out. I'll draw a couple of lines 25mm in from two edges, so I've got a starting point for gluing down the boards, and also use the steel rule to line the boards up as well. Now it's just a matter of gluing out the boards, putting them down, and using the joint width tool to position the boards the correct distance from each other. Trim the turn-ins. I'm using 20mm, 15mm would be fine too. Cut the corners, and then it's time to do the turn-ins. Doing the turn-ins is exactly the same as for a case binding. Turn in head and tail first, pinch down the corners, and then do the four edges. The last piece of cloth for the case is the inside of the spine. Now that can extend an inch and a bit onto each of the boards. That's going to be underneath the trays, so it doesn't really matter how much you go. You don't want to go too far. And it's going to be the same height as the larger tray, so you'll end up with the same square as the square around the larger tray at the top and bottom, so that helps position it. When you glue it out and put it down, you want to put it down so that the center piece adheres first, and then force it down into the joint, and then once it's in the joint, then you can put down the outer pieces. As I put down the outside edges, I'll just use a little bit of force to not really stretch them out, but to put them down without any wrinkles. And as I do that, I'll have the bone folder in the joint just so that I don't pull the cloth out of the joint. Now before we give that a press, we'll just put it together and make sure that we've got all the sizes correct. So perfect, everything's good. And now we'll put that between some boards, and I'll put that little piece of white card in the label inset just so that presses down nicely. As I've mentioned already, there's lots of different ways to make a box enclosure for a book. And there's lots of different construction techniques. I've mentioned Sage's videos many times. I don't think I mentioned the Hollander's book. The Hollanders recently put out a book which I think is an excellent book for someone starting out in bookbinding in general, but it also covers clamshell enclosures. I've placed the case down with the label insert to the top, and the small tray will go to the right. Now I'm just fitting everything, making sure everything fits. I'm putting the small box or tray inside the large one. It will go flush with the right side of the board. I'm making sure the squares are correct, and then I will paste out or glue out the base of the large tray and place it down in the correct position with the squares and the open edge level with the right side of the board. Now I looked for a reference that would say that the smaller tray should always go on the right, but I couldn't find one. But my reasoning is that when you open the box, the book should be on the right, just as you open a book and the text block is on the right. So I think I've been told that before, and that's what I've always done. But I wouldn't be surprised if someone corrected me. Now once I'm happy with the positioning, and I'll check this over and over again because I want it to be right, I'll put a couple of bricks inside the larger tray and just let the glue set up. To attach the smaller tray, we'll put it inside the larger tray and close the case. For that to work, we need it to stick up a little bit, so I've cut a couple of pieces of 1mm board and put them in at the foredge, which will just hold the smaller tray up a little bit. So we'll paste out the base of the smaller tray, put it inside the larger one, and then close the case. And the last thing to do is to make the piece that will go on the inside of the spine, which will close the small tray and provide the book with a dust and light proof enclosure. So I'll cut a piece of board about 1 millimeter smaller than the opening of the smaller tray. And this is why we added that width of board to that tray. This needs to be a snug fit, but it needs to close as well. So we'll start with that 1 millimeter smaller than the opening in both dimensions, and then we'll check it because there's got to take into account the thickness of the cloth that's going to turn over this. I've decided I've made this a bit too snug, so I'll cut 1 millimeter off the end and 1/2 millimeter off the side. Then I'll cover this with cloth. Because it's a thin piece of board, I'm going to use a 15 millimeter turn-in gauge, otherwise the cloth may overlap in the center, but otherwise it's turning in just the same as you would turn in cloth for a case. So check the fit, and I'm very happy with that fit. The box closes nicely and it completes the small tray nicely. Now the trick to positioning that is to have the small tray closed like that, and then glue out that spine piece and then position it with the tray closed. Leave that dry under some weight, and then that's the box completed except for the label. Now I hope you can see why I like this design. It provides a really nice, snug, light and dust-proof enclosure for your valuable books. As always, I hope you've enjoyed this project, and I appreciate you hitting the big thumbs up button. If you want to be notified of my future videos, please hit the subscribe button. I hope everyone is safe and well, and until next time, cheerio.